the survivor who built empires from ashes. There are stories that begin with tragedy but end in light. Stories that prove some souls are not broken by cruelty, they are refined by it. Hers was one of those stories. When she was 6, she was left behind like something disposable. A cabin, a dirt floor, a small suitcase with a torn handle. The world had already decided she was nothing. But life has a way of surprising those who dare to underestimate its survivors. Years later, that same girl stood in a glass tower overlooking Manhattan, a woman whose name echoed in the halls of power. She was known for designing skylines, not just buildings. But one morning her phone rang, and her past came knocking. It was a Tuesday. The city below was alive with noise, but inside her office, the sound of a lawyer's voice pierced through everything. Her father, Andre, the man who had rescued her from that lonely cabin decades ago, was being accused of fraud. Millions gone, they said. The evidence was undeniable. Her heart didn't race. It sank. This was the man who had taken in a lost child and given her not just a home, but a name, an education, and a reason to believe in goodness. Yet now the headlines painted him as a thief. She barely heard the rest of the call. The only words that mattered were 8 hours to defend him, 8 hours to save the man who once saved her. As she drove through the chaos of New York, memories flickered like broken film reels. A dusty road, the sun cutting through the trees, a man stopping his car, his shadow falling over a small girl clutching an old suitcase. He didn't ask where she came from. He just reached out his hand and said words that would change everything. Words she still remembered whenever the world turned cruel again. I won't leave you here. And he never did. He gave her everything he could and more. He made her believe she wasn't broken, just waiting to rebuild. Now that same man sat accused of betrayal by his own company, by a man he once called brother. The name came up again and again. David Morrison, Andre's trusted partner, the man who took over when illness forced him to step aside. But when she saw the documents, she knew. The signatures were perfect, the accounts clean, the story seamless, too seamless. Deception, she realized, wasn't just in the numbers. It was in the confidence of a man who knew how to mimic trust. She asked to hear the recordings, conversations between Andre and Morrison. The lawyer hesitated. She insisted. And when she heard them, her suspicion became certainty. The words had been twisted, spliced, turned into a weapon. Morrison had forged the perfect illusion, turning friendship into evidence, loyalty into guilt. She didn't cry. She didn't rage. She just felt something cold settle inside her, the same cold that once filled a forgotten child's heart. Because she knew this game. She had lived it before, and she was done losing. By nightfall, she had already built a plan. Morrison thought he'd found a scapegoat. What he didn't know was that he'd awakened something he couldn't control. The same fire that had once kept her alive through abandonment now fueled her sense of purpose. For days, Morrison strutted before cameras, spinning lies like gold. He framed himself as the savior of the company, painting Andre as the villain. Reporters ate it up. Investors panicked. Andre, frail and heartbroken, sat in his chair, staring at the world that had turned its back on him. But Gabriella, his daughter not by blood but by choice, was already rewriting the ending. She didn't shout or threaten. She calculated. Every contact, every ally, every whisper of truth. She wove a quiet storm behind closed doors, because real justice doesn't roar. It waits, and when it strikes, it's surgical. When Morrison called her, pretending to offer sympathy, she listened. His voice dripped with false warmth. He offered her a place in his company as long as she distanced herself from her father. He thought he was talking to a desperate daughter. He was talking to the woman who built skyscrapers. She let him speak, even played the part of the wounded child. When she hung up, she had everything she needed, a recording of his arrogance, his prejudice, his belief that she was beneath him. That was the moment he lost. He just didn't know it yet. Gabriella called in favors, not for revenge but for truth. Journalists, lawyers, investors. One by one, she built a web around Morrison's empire of deceit. And she wasn't alone. Jennifer, a journalist with a reputation for exposing corporate corruption, joined her. Together, they unearthed Morrison's past. 3 companies, 3 betrayals, all ending in the same story. Fabricated crimes, destroyed partners, stolen legacies. He was not a businessman. He was a predator. But this time, his prey had teeth. Friday came. Morrison announced a grand investor meeting for Monday. He planned to unveil Andre's removal from his own company. He didn't know Gabriella had already prepared the counterstrike. She gathered evidence, witnesses, and allies. The calm before justice is quiet, eerily so. And as Morrison rehearsed his victory speech, Gabriella wrote a story of ruin, not through anger, through precision. Monday morning, the conference room gleamed like a stage. Morrison arrived early, his smile polished, his lies ready. Around him sat 23 of the most powerful investors in the city. He began his speech with practiced sorrow, showing Andre's face on a screen, labeling him a fraud. Cameras flashed. Laughter echoed softly among the elite. Then the door opened. She walked in, not as the abandoned child from years ago, but as the architect of consequence. The room fell silent. Without a word, she took control of the presentation. Her laptop replaced his, and one by one, the lies began to collapse. Photographs, bank records, audio files, evidence. Morrison's entire history of deception projected for all to see. His voice recorded and played aloud, mocking her background, dismissing her father. And then the truth, the transfers to secret accounts, signed by him, the same day he framed Andre. By the time the final slide faded, there was nothing left to defend. Silence filled the room, heavy as judgment. The investors turned cold. The lawyer stepped forward with formal documents. Charges, fraud, embezzlement, forgery, discrimination. Morrison's face drained of color. He tried to speak, but the room no longer heard him. The same people who once applauded him now avoided his gaze. Power had left the building. Gabriella didn't gloat. She simply watched, not as an avenger, but as a witness to justice finally taking form. In less than half an hour, the empire he'd stolen crumbled before the world. Months later, the headlines changed tone. From abandoned child to visionary, the architect who redefined hope. Gabriella had transformed Wellington and Associates into a new company, one focused on social architecture, designing homes for families who had none. Andre, cleared of all charges, became her partner again. The world now celebrated the story it once ignored, a girl who rose from a shack to a skyline, proving that blood doesn't define family, love does. And Morrison, he became a ghost in the city he once ruled, a man reduced to his own choices, stripped of everything but the lesson he refused to learn. One evening, Gabriella received a call from a children's shelter she had designed. A young girl there, a quiet 8-year-old, had just won a scholarship. When asked what inspired her, the girl had written, "An architect who built me a home and made me believe I mattered." As Gabriella hung up, she smiled through tears, because in that moment, she realized her story had come full circle. She had once been that child, forgotten, rejected, invisible. Now she was the reason another would never feel the same. In the end, her victory wasn't in courtrooms or headlines, it was in legacy. Because true justice isn't about destroying your enemies. It's about building something so enduring that their cruelty becomes irrelevant. Those who underestimate others because of color, class, or circumstance will always lose the same way, by never seeing the strength of what they tried to break. She had turned pain into purpose, rejection into rebirth. And long after her story faded from the news, the lesson remained, etched into every brick she ever laid. You cannot bury light in darkness. It will always rise again.